We need to talk about the Terra Luna Classic proposal that aims to repeal the 50% remint or proposal 100983. This is proposal 11111, all ones right here, and the idea is to repeal the other proposal that set the remint rate at 50%. Now I want to talk to you about what this proposal actually does here and why I don't entirely believe what's going on here. They're recommending to repeal the proposal and reverse the code changes implemented in that proposal. The primary benefits, and this is something I want to touch on here, but we're going to circle back to it. We do not have the consent or approval of individuals or organizations to remit half of what they are burning. Now, the person who proposed this, Matt, believes it is in the community's best interest to repeal and replace it prior. Matt, who made this proposal, believes it is in the community's best interest to repeal and replace the proposal, going back to the prior 0.2% tax and 10% of the burn tax to be reminted, sent to the community pool after the time being. And so here's the parameter change. It looks a little bit funky because it's setting it to 0.9, but that's actually kind of like the reverse here is what he's trying to do. This does look like it matches up with the previous proposal that set it at 10%. So this sentence right here is the primary issue I have with this proposal, is that the primary benefit, we do not have the consent or approval of individuals or organizations to remit half of what they're burning. You've probably, if you're on Twitter, seen this circulating quite a bit. People are saying things to rile people up, in my opinion. They're saying things like, we don't have CZ's consent to remint 50% of what he burned. CZ committed to burning. We can't remint it. Things like that are just trying to rile people up, seems like. And it's not that it's untrue, but if we read the sentence, we don't have the consent. So we're going to stop reminting entirely, right? Because we don't have their consent to remint what they're burning, right? Well, that's not entirely true. We're still going to have it at 10%. As far as I know, and anybody's free to correct me if I'm wrong, I will make a statement of correction here, but we don't have, to my knowledge, Binance, CZ's, or other people's consent to remit 10%. And so I failed to see the logical process here of how this is fully connecting the dots without just purely trying to rile people up. You're saying that we don't have Binance's consent for 50% burn. This is theft. We're stealing from Binance. Using words like that, taking Binance's money and putting it in our own pockets, using language like that to really rile people up. But at the end of the day, this proposal, what this boils down to, is we're still taking 10% of what Binance is burning. And to my knowledge, they're not consenting to that, and other individuals are not consenting to that. So it's like you're pushing this narrative that we don't have every single person's consent to do this, so we can't do this. Yet we had a majority who said yes, and yeah, there are people who said no, but that's just the reality of the situation of any proposal, really. And Duncan brought up a good point over here on Twitter. He said, by the way, this proposal states we don't have the consent of individuals. You do not have my consent to burn through taxes when I was using the chain, but I'm still subject to it. And so I think that's really highlights the point. It's like, wait a second, there's people who also didn't agree with the burn. The burn didn't pass with 100% yes votes. And even if it did pass with 100% yes votes, if we follow this logic process, everyone who uses it has to consent with it for it to be okay. And that just doesn't make sense. It's just not practical. We have to go by what the majority says. And the majority here voted yes. And so I find it kind of strange that they're saying, well, we don't have everybody's consent, so we can't do it. But at the same time, we're still going to do 10%. So it's like, oh, we're still going to. So if we follow their logic here, 50%, we're stealing, we're taking the money, put it in our own pockets, we're thieves. But we're just not going to do it as much. We're only going to steal 10% of your wallet. We're not going to steal everything. We're only going to steal 10% of what's in your bank account. We're not taking everything. And so in my opinion, the logic just doesn't check out. If we're trying to say the standard is we need everyone's consent to pass something because we don't have some people's consent, we can't do it, and then we're just going to do a little bit of it instead of as much of it, like it just doesn't make sense. Also, this original proposal to set the remit to 50% passed only 15 days ago, just over 2 weeks ago, so we don't really have any data to collect to see, did this work, did this not work? And then they go ahead and put up a proposal to repeal it and use this emotional language to rile people up to vote no who maybe voted yes originally. And I think that's a little bit troublesome for our community here. And I think even just beyond the inconsistencies with the motivation behind this proposal, we have very clear knowledge now that Zaradar is trying to form a team with Ed Kim. We talked about this in the Crypto Bros podcast where we interviewed Zaradar the other day. If you haven't seen that, check it out. But Zaradar has left the Terra Rebels. And as part of this, he's trying to start a Layer 1 dev team with Ed Kim and some other Layer 1 developers. And he's made it clear that he's going to need some substantial funding to actually make that team work because he's done with working for free. He needs to support his family, which I understand. And so he's going to be charging a fair amount of money. He wants to charge a fair price for his work. And same with the other Layer 1 developers, because he understands if we want to get other developers on the chain, this is something we talked about in the podcast, so I'd recommend checking it out if you haven't seen it. But if we want to get more developers here in our ecosystem, we have to fairly compensate them. If they want to go to something to where they can get compensated, they can go over to 2.0 and there's hundreds of millions of dollars in their community pool that's being distributed currently to different development projects. And so we have to compensate developers fairly, and you're talking 150,000 a year plus for some of these very experienced developers. And so I really don't see a need. I think it's kind of maybe a bad idea here for us to get rid of the income source. I can see a reason here where you say we don't really want to do this, but I would say first, let's get a different income source that's going to replace this. Because if we don't replace this income source, then now we don't have money to pay the developers and we get nothing done. And it doesn't matter if we burn the supply, because guess what? Right now, we're currently sitting at less than 1% of the total supply has been burned so far. So let's say that by the time we get to a real issue here, we have 10x this and made it 5.3% of the total supply has been burned. Great. Now we can't fund developers because let's say we don't implement another funding system. We can't fund developers. And now we probably have a net negative price change because you've burned 5% of total supply, but the future outlook for the project looks very grim without us being able to fund developers. And so you end up in just a scenario where you don't actually even potentially increase the price at all. Or if you do increase the price, market cap stays the exact same, you decrease the total supply, your price goes up by maybe a couple percentage points. Like you're not talking even a 2x, you're talking like a 5-6% gain, like nothing significant. So in my opinion, I have a really hard time supporting something that's going to take funding away from the community pool that we know now we need for Zaradar and Ed Kim and other critical developers when we don't have a replacement. I would be down to support this kind of a proposal in the future when we have a replacement for the funding. But until then, I don't want us to end up in a scenario where we can't pay the developers that we need to pay just to try and burn an extra 0.1% of the total supply. To me, that just seems kind of silly because it's not going to get us really anywhere effective at the end of the day. And to be clear, I don't think that this should stay around forever. I think we need to find those other sustainable sources of funding. But until we come up with something, I don't want to remove this. I hope we can remove this in the future. We can focus more on burns. But until we have the other sustainable sources of funding, I don't see us having any reason to remove this right now. If you guys got value out of this video, be sure to check out this video up here and maybe even buy some cool Terra Luna Classic merch like this mug on the shop, link down below.